In owning a sailboat, cruising, sailing long hauls, going and visiting far off places, there's the dream and then there's reality. The dream is certainly something to get caught up on, but before you make big investments and take on big life-changing events, there is a discussion that needs to be had when it comes to what is the reality and what type of issues do you need to take on. All boats have quality production issues. If you think you're buying a boat and it's going to be perfect when you get it delivered, it's going to look perfect at delivery, but you're going to quickly find out you're going to have hours upon hours of tuning and correcting and making sure things fit together in the proper fashion. It is not going to come turnkey. We thought it was important that we talk about those challenges so that anybody who's actually interested in doing this, they recognize what the challenges are, because not everybody manages through those challenges and keeps their boat. We thought we would break up the challenges of owning a boat to the handover process and the challenges that we found on our vessel once we purchased and had the boat handed over. The first long sail period where we were actually using the vessel for the first time, then the first season that we had the vessel, and then the second season that we were sailing. We are not trying to put any of the vendors or the manufacturers in a negative light. Things will not be completely turnkey. It's not because of the specific manufacturer. It is an issue within the complete sailing community. Some boats may be better equipped and operate in certain areas than others, but it is a standard issue for anyone who buys a boat that they're going to have things that need to be fixed from the get-go.
Meet Lab Mariner, our home on the water, and her crew. Anubis, the huntress. Jim, the captain. Mocha, the camera dog. Nuala, the greeter, and Stephanie, the cruise director. Problems we found at handover.
So the first phase for us was at handover, getting a brand new vessel, never been used, just freshly off the production line. And at first blush, you would think that, like owning a car, you get this sweet ride and everything works, and they offer you multi-year warranty, and you never have to hardly ever take it in except for a few small issues. And you have to realize that this model right here, they make 40 or 50 of them a year. A car company will make 40 or 50 cars in the first 15 minutes at 8 a.m. in the morning. This is a handmade vessel. It is a production line, but it is not something where they're making hundreds of thousands of these units. And so as a result, you are going to get a production boat that was handmade individually. So when you get a production boat like that, there are going to be tons and tons of small things that weren't done perfectly. Second of all, when you get your vessel, it's not like you are going to be right next to your dealer. It's a sailboat. You're sailing it everywhere. The moment you move away from the dealer, all those little problems are 10 times harder to fix. And what ultimately happens is a large number of those responsibilities, no matter what they are, fall on your shoulders to start to figure out how to fix. Our situation with the handover our boat at closing, I stayed on the boat for the month after we had the handover, and I lived on the boat, but this was at a point in time where we were doing aftermarket upgrades. What that allowed me to do is to live on the boat and actually go through the manuals, and it allowed me to do a lot of finding issues that we could fix while the boat was still at the docks where we had the handover made. In other words, the manufacturer and all the representatives were there to take care of all these problems.
Problem 1, salon door not latching.
Both of these doors move, and underway they can slide back and forth as the boat's going back and forth. So what you want is this one latches and locks, and this one latches and locks. When we first got the vessel, an issue we had that I thought was fixable, but after a month of people working on it, the first team threw up their hands and said they couldn't fix it. When you try to open this, it would jam here, And then when you actually start opening the door, you would find that the actual edge of the door that's supposed to fit into all of these different facets was buckling, and the door was not in the same plane, so when you put it together it would not connect, and when you could finally get it connect, it would be connected in such a jammed way that you would even have a hard time opening this. And then there were certain times when they were fixing it that I'd come back and it would not latch any longer. So then it would just go back and forth, which under any sailing condition is just a non-stop. Ultimately, a second team from South Africa, from the original boatyard, was here in Florida, and they came over and worked on this. And they worked multiple days, 4 people, probably 10 hours each, because this whole frame is put in near the very beginning of the construction, and then all these other pieces go around it. And as a result, you just cannot get to this door frame back here. They had to basically be able to somehow go in here and readjust the trueness of this entire frame. And I came back 2 days later after watching them work, and I honestly, at the time, felt like this was going to be an albatross we were just going to have to live with. But it's been 2 years, and now it still easily unlatches, easily slides, and easily catches back. So this was absolutely godsend to me. There are multiple problems with this door from multiple owners' reports, but most of them are here. I think our problem, either I haven't heard anybody else speak of it, or they've never figured it out that it actually is out of true.
Problem 2, salon ceiling panels falling down.
One of the things decorative-wise that makes Leopard's interiors look really, really comfortable, you don't notice it if it's working correctly, but when it doesn't work correctly, it can be a big problem. And what I'm talking about are these beautiful ceilings. These ceilings up here, these white panels, they're actually attached to come down because there's a bunch of wiring that you need to always be able to access. We probably access one of these panels once every 3 to 4 months. But the problem is that these panels are actually covered pieces of giant plywood. If you look this way, you can see that this entire piece of plywood goes from here to here and has this camber to it. And there's even a slight camber this way to it. And as a result, when you try to pop it up in there and have it stay, almost all owners report that these panels fall down. And once they start falling down, they just constantly fall down. What Leopard and aftermarket people have done is they basically go in there and they put screws here, here, and along here, and have these little white caps that cover the screws, and it fixes it. They don't come down. It makes it very tough to pull these down. You have to unscrew every single one, and then you pull down the panel so you can get into the ceiling and get to all the wiring that's up here. We were lucky because we had a third party come in and they took down the panels, and then they put this 2-inch wide Velcro up and down all of these panels and across anytime there was a rib that could match up against the actual structural part of the vessel. And they put up this 2-inch Velcro everywhere on the panel. But the Velcro, because of this camber, it has such a big spring to it, it was not strong enough to actually stay on, because what would happen would be the glue would delaminate and peel off, and then all of a sudden the panel would start falling down. So the group that we had working on this, they came in and literally took these little tiny stainless steel flathead screws, and they would pre-drill and screw in, pre-drill and screw in. They would put 2 in and go 3 inches, 2 more in, 3 inches, 2 more in. So underneath all of this, literally hundreds of flat-headed screws that are holding the 2-inch Velcro up into the ceiling, and other screws going straight into the panel. And with all those hundreds and hundreds of screws and all that Velcro, these things don't move. And it's beautiful. It looks great. And anytime you need to pull it down for us, we just start pulling down, and you can hear the Velcro. It's coming apart. Okay, and I slowly peel the Velcro off, and this whole panel will come down, and it's not a problem. Anybody else, they have to go unpop all these caps, unscrew each one of the screws, and then pull down the panel. And then when it's time to put it back up, they have to put that screw back in, find that perfect place where they drilled it initially, and put it in, and hope that the screw doesn't pull through. Because all this is some fiberglass up here, and you put the screw in and out enough times, and all of a sudden a screw hole is going to be bored out and it's not going to hold anymore. So we've been very lucky with this solution.
Problem 3, broken salon window.
At handover, when we received the boat, the seller notified us that this window pane here had a crack in it and it needed to be replaced. Unfortunately, the replacement window was in South Africa, so they had to ship it. A number of months after it being shipped and then finally catching up to us, we then went around to a number of different boat yards to see if someone would actually remove this window and then put the new one in. It's not like a window in a house. It's all glued and laminated in, and you have to pull that off, which is very tricky because it's a lot of glue and lamination here. And then when you put the new one on, you have to put glue and laminate on it again, and you have to put so many pounds per square inch on this window as the glue and the laminate material is setting up. And no one wanted to do it because it's a tricky process for which most boat yards haven't had a lot of experience. So at this point, we have the window here in the boat, and we know of one group in Florida that will do it. They've done this type of work before. So we still carry the replacement window. It's no big deal. It's a small crack right here. It's not structural to the boat. It doesn't leak. It doesn't rack. It doesn't do anything. It just sits there and is broken. This port is working fine. We will, at some point, with the financial backing of the manufacturer, have this window replaced. We can also say that the Leopard 45 group that we are part of, I think there's one other vessel that had this one problem. And so it's not a prevalent problem within the production of this vessel.
We've been storing that window for about 2 years now. And where are we storing it, you're probably asking, because it takes up quite a bit of space. We are actually storing it in our cushion locker. What's our cushion locker? Our cushion locker is actually our port forward bathroom, which we're not using. So we turned it into a cushion locker because you really need to have storage for all those cushions you have. Let me show you our cushion storage locker and also that window. And here's the window. It is in its protective covering. And we thought the cushion storage locker was a perfect place to put it because it would be cushioned by the cushions. Problems we found sailing up the East Coast.
The next period was sailing away from the dock after all our initial post-handover improvements were done by Just Cats. And at that time, we then sailed away. We sailed away not just 10 miles, not just 50 miles. We sailed 900 miles away. And we weren't going to be back in that area for at least a year or two. And you can imagine that after that handover period, to get anything fixed from then on out was going to be pretty much on you. Even if someone was willing to pay for that because it was not your fault that it broke and it was under warranty, it was still going to be up to you to get it taken care of. And there were numerous things that we found on our sail from Dania Beach, Florida, up to the Chesapeake. And we were lucky enough to actually have someone that was a captain that we had hired to come with us. And he was very familiar with leopards. He had done delivery of leopards for about 17 years, so he knew all the ins and outs. So we spent a whole month working on this vessel. He gets on board, first day sailing, he is finding blocks that were put on at 90 degrees. He was finding holes that needed to be caulked. He gave me probably a list of at least 15 things that needed to be done on a 5-day trip. And he probably fixed another 10 or 15 things that he found that he knew about because of all of his years of actually delivering brand new leopards and knowing he had to fix things on the fly. And on top of that, we were going 900 miles with him, and so we were putting the boat through a fairly long haul sail that kept everything under tension for 5.5 or 6 days. As soon as we got up to the Chesapeake, we had a long list of things that already needed to be fixed. There was software that was not working. Our AIS was not picking up vessels very easily. There were tons of things that under that first long haul sail we needed to start fixing. So ultimately what we did is we kept sailing and limping along, and we had a number of issues that we did not fix for the first 2 or 3 months because we wanted to enjoy our boat, and we just tried to find workarounds and kept a list.
Problem 1, broken clutch.
Our first major sail was going all the way to the Chesapeake, and during that sail we had this clutch break. And a clutch, basically what it does is when you press this arm down, it holds the line and will not let the line through. What had happened, which we come to find out has been a production issue for probably the first 80 to 100 boats that they made of this. The template was incorrectly set up, and this block right here, when it was originally put in, was put in about 2 inches over to the port side. When this was 2 inches over, the line right here did not run directly true through this clutch onto the winch. And so when we were sailing with a port tack, and we had 18 knots of wind hitting this massive sail, a very large portion of all that pressure went through this block, made the turn, and then went through this clutch. What had happened was the line was off by about 30 degrees, and so the line was actually putting a massive amount of pressure on this clutch laterally, and these things are not built for lateral pressure, as this whole side just blew out. We had to make a number of changes during our sail to account for the non-functioning nature of this clutch. We were able to make those changes and get on with our sailing. So in order to fix that, after we got through our sail, we had to have this block removed, the holes that originally were put in the fiberglass filled and cleaned up, and then move the block the 3 inches over, re-drill the holes, remount the block, and then we had to buy a whole new clutch. It's all under warranty. Since we've done that over a year ago, we've been very happy with these clutches. They've worked very well.
Problem 2, autopilot skipping.
One of the next issues came about with our autopilot. We were on a long voyage, and during that voyage, we heard a kink, 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 kink up here at the helm. And it was obvious that it was a chain slipping across a cog or sprocket and slipping over the teeth. We went underneath this area where we could see where the autopilot motor, which basically the way autopilot works is there's an electric motor, it's got a cog, a chain on it, and then the chain connects to another cog that's on the helm wheel here. And that motor basically is used to rotate the helm wheel and have the vessel go in the proper direction and keep the autopilot steering. And we had a failing of the chain to engaging those sprockets. It only happened a few times, even over a 6-day sail, and it seemed to me that it wasn't a breakage. Once we got into Marina and I had a boatyard look at the situation, I got a quote from them, but it just didn't stick right on me that we were going to have to pull out equipment, re-engineer fasteners, because we'd only heard from all the other owners, maybe 10-15% of them had reported this type of an issue, and it just felt like when I saw that the chain was loose that it was really a seating of the motor. And I went back 3 or 4 times figuring out and fiddling with the motor, and then finally I was able to get all the setting screws that held the motor loose, and I was able to rotate the motor in 2 directions that allowed the chain to actually get tight. I also took some time trying to figure out how, once it was seated correctly, how to get the screws tight. Because when it was seated correctly, getting back to the bolt to hold it so that you could tighten the nut was extremely difficult, and it took a great deal of experimenting to see how I could grab that bolt so I could tighten the nut. And once I was able to accomplish that, all the things worked. The chain was the proper tightness, the autopilots worked. We've been on it for 1.5 years, 2 years since then, and we've never had it jump one bit. It's been a very nice autopilot. But again, this is probably just by how hard it was for me to tighten it in the proper position. It was probably a worker trying to get 25 things done in their workday. Their job was to put in that autopilot, and they were left trying to figure out how to get those bolts tight. And they tightened in the way that left the chain loose, but it got the job done, and 99% of the time the chain worked fine. When we were on to autopilot, it was that less than 1% that it would shake, and it was up to us to figure out kind of the proper way of fixing it. And I'm so glad that it was ultimately me who fixed it, because the solution that the boatyard had suggested was removing the entire electric motor, pulling out the hangers that held it, cutting them and slapping them back on, and all it was just loosening the bolts from the hanger, allowing the motor to sit better and at the right proper angle to the chain and the sprocket, and it all lined up. So Robertson Kane, which are the builders of this vessel and the engineering of the vessels, they had it all right. They knew the proper seating, they knew the proper place to put it. It's just tightening the screws once you're actually in the midst of assembling the vessel. That was the issue here. So again, you're going to get a great vessel, but they're not making 1,000 of these like they do a day in an auto manufacturer. You've got one person assembling all of this that may touch an autopilot once every 3 or 4 weeks to put one into a boat. And to expect them to be able to do it properly in the same way each and every time, I don't think you can expect that from any manufacturer. There are going to be things that were put in, they thought it was going to work, but it wasn't put in absolutely properly, and it's going to have to be up to you to either keep taking it back to the boat yard or for you to get on the case of the problem and try to figure out a solution that'll work. When the autopilot isn't working, even getting to starting to fix it is an undertaking. In order to work behind the electronics at the helm, we have to access this ceiling and then access up on top. That requires this door to close, exposing the door here. You bring down, you need a stool right here, and then you kind of crawl up here.
Problem 3, loose screws.
When owning a vessel, you're always going around and making sure the lines are properly tensioned, that the nuts and bolts are screwed in, that the screws are properly tightened. And that's doubly so when you get a brand new boat. Never assume that any of the screws and bolts were properly seated and put down. I know that sounds like a big issue to go and run down throughout your boat, but personally speaking, I have found numerous screws that were not in a full tightened fashion. I've even found 1 or 2 that have fallen out that I didn't see. As an example, these cars that run a track to hold the sail to the mast, the car is attached to the sail through probably about a dozen of these white nylon bushings, and through them you can see this bushing has 8 screws and nuts. And I have gone through to each one of these cars and I've hand tightened each one with an Allen wrench, and I would say probably a good third of them were not of proper tightness. We've been told by other owners that every once in a while they'll find that one had fallen out. Another example where we've had some nuts and bolts and screws loose, we had a few ports that were seeping water when it was raining, and all that required to do was just basically going around the port flange and just tightening all the screws to a proper tightness around, and all of a sudden all those leaks were gone. And again, a good 20% of those screws were just put in. They were kind of lightly twisted, but they weren't put down to a reasonable tightness. Again, we've even found in our steering rigging a few bolts that needed extra tightening, and that is a concern. I mean, that's steerage.
So I hope you've enjoyed our part 1 of our 2-part series with boat fixes that we experienced during our first 2 years of boat ownership. In part 2, which we're going to show in a few weeks, so make sure to hit that subscribe button so that you're notified when it comes up. We're going to detail those fixes in the Chesapeake as well as those that we encountered while sailing south down the Atlantic coast to Bahamas.